Okay.
Kathy's going to introduce our guest speaker.
Actually, Deborah is. So thank you, Jack, for the mystery bird.
Oh.
And if any of our participants would ever like to contribute a mystery bird, you can just email it to the website that you see on Orange Audubon. Okay, so now our chapter president, Deborah Green. You there, Deborah? Is going to introduce our guest.
Yes, thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Jack. Andy Bankert has been a birder since receiving the National Geographic Field Guide for his 5th birthday. And his hobby has taken him all over the world, all over the country and other parts of the world, searching for birds. He grew up in Brevard County, birding with his family, but soon left Florida and has worked as a field technician for the Bird Conservancy of the Rockies throughout the Great Plains region, as a shorebird and seabird biologist for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service across Alaska, and a seabird surveyor in Hawaii. And Alaska has been a special magnet for him. He's tried to get up there and do field work every summer. So I'll let Andy fill us in on what he's exactly doing now. And we are most appreciative, Andy, of you joining us. I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, everybody. As Deborah said, my name's Andy Bankert. I originally grew up in Central Florida, and then since graduating from college, I've been out west and finally moved out to Alaska last year and really enjoying it. And this is just going to give you the presentation on the birds of Alaska today. And when you think of Alaska, you might think of a lot of different birding wonders that would be really unfamiliar to Floridians, like flocks of thousands of breeding plumage shorebirds migrating and feeding during huge tides during their spring migration. These are all western sandpipers, and you can see a couple of Dunlin with their black belly here. And as these birds are migrating up, they only care about feeding before they head off to their breeding grounds. You might think it's a great spot for owls because a lot of people think like Minnesota is a great place to go see owls, but every year there's tons of great grays and hawk owls up here. And we're lucky to have this great gray owl right in Anchorage last year, about 15 minutes from where I live. You're silently watching and looking and listening for food. Alaska's a great spot to see bears, and they often get close to people, especially in areas where fish are popular, because both the bears and the people want fish. And there's some spots in the state where boreal owls are so common that the locals forget to tell you that they have one nesting in their yard because they just assume everybody has one nesting in their yard. As we go around a tour of the state today, we're going to see a bunch of different habitats. We're going to see the coastal rainforest down in the southeastern part of the state, the glacial fjords at the end of these where the water or there's rainforest comes in. We're going to see majestic mountains rising out of the boreal forest up to treeless alpine habitat. And that's going to give way to treeless areas of tundra out in the Yukon Delta with slight mountains in the background, all the way up to Alaska's North Slope past the Brooks Range, where there's almost no topography at all, and it's about as flat as Florida is. We'll even take a short trip offshore to see some of the volcanic islands in the Bering Sea. But for most of the year, Alaska, even though in all its splendor, is covered in snow and ice. And even though it is over for a good bit of the year, up the northern part of the state. But even though it's dark for most of the year in the winter, most of the time in the winter, the sky still lights up, just not with the sun, but with the northern lights. And then eventually, right around this time, the sun keeps coming out, and it'll keep melting the snow to feed the state's rivers, which give life to a lot of the things in the state, like fish and birds and bears. And most of our trip today is going to focus on the summer because that's really the season that you want to go and visit Alaska. And even the economy is one of the things that gets fed by the fish and the water of this great state. And as we travel, we're going to see some common birds that we might be familiar with in Florida, like American robin and downy woodpecker and Savannah sparrow. All these birds are fairly regular in Florida, but they're also fairly regular up in Alaska as well. And we're going to see some things we might not be too familiar with in Florida, like black-bellied plovers and breeding plumage, or Arctic terns, or salmon skulls. And we might also get to see some things that we can almost never dream of seeing in Florida, like ivory gull, and Steller's Eiders, and crested auklets. So let's hop on board and see what Alaska has to offer today. And hopefully nobody had to work too hard. I know it is a weekday, and hopefully I don't see too many yawns out in the audience or anybody napping, because we don't want anybody to miss the wonders that are Alaska. We're going to start our trip actually in the Rocky Mountains, where some of us might have visited them, not in Alaska, but in places like Colorado or Montana, where we see a lot of the same birds that are regular in areas of the western United States, like American three-toed woodpecker and white-tailed ptarmigan, where I lived in Colorado. If you said ptarmigan, we didn't really think about other species. This is the only species of ptarmigan which nests up in the high alpine treeless areas in areas of Colorado and Utah and Montana. Then as we travel further north and go down the mountains, we're going to run into some prairies and see some birds that we might be familiar with in the prairies of the western United States, like upland sandpiper and mountain bluebird. And then as we get further north, we're going to run into the boreal forests, where we're going to see birds that might not be as common in the lower 48 and might be in more remote areas like New York and Minnesota, to see birds like spruce grouse, as they just sit silently in the forest before they wander off to their next location. And we'll see some other birds like Bohemian waxwing, which has never been seen in Florida before, but sometimes thousands and thousands of them come down to the Great Plains as far south as northern Texas. And Blackbucked Woodpecke, which nests in the Sierras and in California, as well as the boreal forests of the northern lower 48. And they're fairly common around any burn areas across much of Alaska. And in the springtime, they're excavating their cavities, especially in recently burned areas where they haven't nested before. They'll search out these areas where fires tap in, just like our red-cockaded woodpeckers need fire to survive. The blackback woodpeckers thrive in areas with burns because there's more food around. But when they do move and follow the food, they have to spend a lot of time excavating cavities. Sometimes this can take almost a whole season to get a nest ready. We'll see another bird, the boreal chickadee, which is really common up here and really rare in the lower 48. I know down in Florida, even Carolina chickadees can be uncommon in most of the state. And this is one of our most common feeder birds we have up here in Alaska, which is rarely seen elsewhere in the country. And one of my favorites, the great gray owl, which will just sit silently in the boreal forest waiting for a meal. A lot of times we see pictures of these guys out in the open in areas like Minnesota. These birds are really hungry and almost lost looking for food. But when you see them in the boreal forest, that's when they're really in their element, in their habitat where they're supposed to be, just sitting silently in all that greenery, waiting for their next meal to come within earshot before they dive down on them. And eventually we'll leave the boreal forest and head up to the alpine habitat, where we can see birds like northern wheatear, which nest on the rocky hillsides up above the tree line. And these birds will migrate all the way to Alaska from Africa. And then in August, they'll start their westward migration all the way back to near the Sahara Desert of Africa. And up there, we'll see another bird. That's a world traveler, the wandering tattler, which nests in similar habitats along rocky streams where there aren't any trees up high. And this bird will fly all the way down to the Pacific coast of California and Mexico, and also down to the islands of the Pacific, so Hawaii and Polynesia and everything. That's where these guys will spend the winter. A lot of birds this guy will go to a small area on Texas, but where they're in a drab brown plumage when you see them in North 48, Texas. They're in their bright orange plumage in the summertime up here in Alaska. And then also in the mountains, we'll see these large rivers of ice called glaciers, which are slowly making their way down towards the ocean as gravity pulls them, just like it does a normal river. And where they come into the ocean, we have these areas called glacial fjords, where they've carved out large sections of land in U-shaped valleys. And this is a good area to see some other species. But where the river started up high, we'll see one of the coolest birds is the harlequin duck, which sometimes makes it to Florida, but they need fast-moving waters to breed. And here's a mother with some chicks in this fast-moving stream where they were hatched earlier in the summer. And also in the fast-moving water, we'll see a species familiar across much of the western U.S., but maybe not familiar to anybody who's only stayed in the east, the American dipper, which is a songbird, almost like a little wren that'll walk along the edge of creeks and even some large rivers and bob under the water and run around on the ground on the gravel beds looking for food, looking for insects to pick up before popping back up and repeating it over and over again throughout the day. And then as we move, we'll move over to the bog habitats, which are just little swampy areas within the forest where we'll get a new set of birds, like the lesser yellowlegs, which we see fairly commonly in Florida in the winter, but they'll sing from the tops of trees on the edge of bogs where they build their nest, and then they'll raise their young, running around the bogs looking for insects. And we'll see hermit thrushes singing all throughout the night, because during the peak of summer, it doesn't really get that dark. It just is dusk for a couple hours before the sun comes back up around 2 or 3 in the morning, and they'll sing to the moon all night long. And one of the other special birds is the northern saw-whet owl, which doesn't get much night, so they have to use that dark time wisely to get their food while they're raising young. And the northern hawk owl, which is a diurnal raptor, despite being an owl, just like burrowing owls are mostly diurnal. And they'll sit perched up above the bog in this distinctive silhouette, looking for food, looking for a mouse or a vole to walk on by, because they're going to be feeding their young, which are just sitting there waiting and begging for food. There'll be about 5 or 6 of these that the parent has to feed. And all morning long, all day long during the month of July, they're feeding these chicks. They're constantly screaming in these mosquito-filled bogs saying, I'm hungry, find me some food. And hopefully the adults can find enough food to raise all 6 or 7 chicks. And some years, if there's not enough food around, only 1 or 2 little chicks will survive. And then we'll see the mute gull. We're used to seeing gulls on beaches and on lakes and water, but up in Alaska during the summertime, these mute gulls nest in the boggy habitats up in trees to avoid predators like foxes and lynx. And this is what a baby mute gull looks like before it takes its flight out to the ocean around August or September when they're ready to go south for the winter. And on some of the larger lakes in the boggy areas, we'll see a really cool species of redneck grebe, which most of us only see in the non-breeding plumage in lower 48. And they're mostly gray and brown, and you can't really tell why they're called redneck grebes, but on these you can see why they're called that. And then also on these floating mats of vegetation in these lakes. And just like most other grebe species, the babies will sit on the mom's back, and she'll carry them around until they're old enough to swim on their own. But the parents have to keep feeding them, because they keep feeding them stuff like fish and other aquatic animals, because when the grebes are babies, they don't exactly know how to fish yet. Even though they're teenagers and can swim on their own, they might pick up a leaf and hope it's food, and then realize quickly that it's not. Then eventually, if we follow the rivers and the bogs down further, we'll reach the ocean, where the glaciers come into the sea. And we'll see a lot of sea creatures like the marble murrelet and the pigeon guillemot. And we'll see sea otters. And a really special place in Alaska, Prince William Sound, about 30 years ago, in 1989, the oil tanker Exxon Valdez hit Blythe's Reef, and dumped a bunch of oil into the sound. And unfortunately, really decimated the population of a lot of these oceanic species like the guillemots and the sea otters. And every couple of years, they do surveys to see how the sound has responded with all the effort that they've put in. And luckily, they've seen a lot of good recovery, like black-legged kittiwakes have come back in good numbers, like you can see here on this iceberg that was taken in Prince William Sound. The sea otters have responded after decades of work and time passage since the oil spill. And the guillemots are even coming back. And now we have other species like orcas throughout Prince William Sound and much of other coastal Alaska. Really cool animals that spend a lot of time feeding in the ocean on on fish and mammals and other things, and occasionally birds. There's a really special bird right where the glaciers come into the ocean. The salt water turns to fresh water because of all the ice. And it's really silty in here because the glaciers are dumping all this silt. And this is a bird called the Kittiwakes. This mirror-like comes and feeds in this area, feeding on little fish that are unique to that area, and they can see really well in these silty waters. And we're going to follow these murrelets from Prince William Sound over across the land to a spot called Kittiwakes Bay, which is where the town of Homer is, to see one of the greatest spectacles Alaska has to offer, the shorebird migration, where tens of thousands of western sandpipers and other species will come and feed in the bay throughout the year, throughout the first couple weeks of May, and species including short-billed dowitcher and dunlin and Hudsonian godwit. But the star of the show in Kittiwakes Bay is the western sandpiper, because these other species will oftentimes flock up in flocks of like 10 to 20 birds, maybe a couple hundred in the case of dunlin. But for western sandpipers, these birds number in the thousands. And all they're doing during this week or two that they're in Kittiwakes Bay is looking for food and then hiding at high tide when all the food is covered up. So they're just pecking at the ground constantly looking for food. This is a common sight along the coast. You have to back up a couple of come up behind you on that's South America. You cover this one or two little special areas where there's a lot of food. They're almost much of the day they're eating or resting. And then they're looking to the west of them, and they're going to see these mountains over there, the Alaska Range, or eventually they're going to fly over there and make it over to the Yukon Delta, where instead of a bunch of mud flats in a tidal area, there's a vast area of open flat tundra, which is perfect for breeding because there's constant food and constant daylight, because there's a lot of insects and other animals on the tundra up there. And as we travel over there, we're going to see some familiar species like yellow rump warbler and tree swallow. And it might be weird to think that there's tree swallows out in this treeless area, and they have a hard time finding nesting sites. Sometimes they'll nest in riverbanks, or maybe one or two willows that's large enough to build a nest in. And sometimes researchers will put out coffee cans for the birds to nest in. Unfortunately, these birds looked at it and realized that it wasn't a real tree and moved on after a couple of days. We never saw them again, so they definitely know what to look out for cavities on the tundra. You'll see one of the prettiest birds, the American tree sparrow, as they sit and sing from their low shrubby perches where they build their nests. And the Yukon Delta is one of the sandhill crane factories for the world, where the cranes will come up here and nest. And this is where they raise their young, like this chick that had just hatched the previous day. But again, the star out here is the western sandpiper. They'll come out here and they'll lay a nest of 4 eggs and sit on that nest for about 3 to 4 weeks before the chicks hatch. And then the chicks have to navigate the tundra by themselves, with some help from the adults. And one of the main challenges they have is a bunch of predators like long-tailed jaegers and glaucous gulls and foxes. But eventually these birds wind up to become like teenage sandpipers. And at this age, they're almost ready to make their first flight all the way down to the coast of California or the Gulf Coast before they come back up the next year to breed. And while they're wandering around the tundra, they're going to share it with other shorebird species like whimbrel and bar-tailed godwit, which has the longest known direct flight all the way from New Zealand. In the spring, they'll come up the Asian flyway, stopping in places like Korea and Japan and China before coming up to the Yukon Delta, and then they'll fatten up along the coast and then take a several day, I think it's like 6 or 8 day straight shot all the way down to New Zealand in the fall. So during a couple weeks in August, they'll just fatten up and they'll eat and eat and eat until it's finally time to go, and they'll make that straight shot. I think it's like 6,000 or 8,000 kilometers straight to New Zealand. And another bird, the bristle-thighed curlew, is a rare bird, only breeds in Alaska, nowhere else in the world. And they only breed at four fairly small sites, and then they spend their winters down in the Hawaiian Islands and the other islands of the South Pacific. While running around the tundra, we might find a species like the willow ptarmigan, like our mystery bird tonight. And they can be really hard to spot sometimes because they're very well camouflaged in the summer, and then in the winter they're bright white. And also in the rivers out here, we'll see a species of duck, the common merganser, which relies on moving streams to catch fish up in the mountains. And they're going to be sharing the river with grizzly bears, which are a really common sight out in this area where the salmon are migrating up to their spawning grounds. And in the summer, the salmon they'll hatch in the rivers, and then they'll swim out to the ocean and spend like 5 to 10 years in the ocean, fattening up and growing, and then they'll come back up the rivers to spawn. And then when they spawn, they die, and the bears will try to catch them either before they reach their spawning grounds, or sometimes when they die, they'll get their carcasses. But they really want to catch them when they're fresh and more nutritious as they're migrating up. And the bears will share the rivers with the common mergansers, as well as other species like locust winged gulls, which are one of the scavengers, which will pick up a bunch of fish scraps that the bears leave behind. Another breeding bird that's a long distance migrant is the Arctic tern, which has the longest migration of any species, coming all the way from Antarctica up to the Arctic to nest every year, and they go back and forth searching for that perpetual daylight. And we'll follow this Arctic tern from the Yukon Delta up to the Seward Peninsula, where the town of Nome is located, to see a couple new species. Especially, and we'll see more willow ptarmigans up there, because since it is a state bird, they are throughout much of the state. Also, another special species, the Aleutian tern, which only nests in the Bering Sea and Gulf of Alaska regions, and winters down off the coast of Australia and New Zealand. Not a whole lot is known about them in the wintering grounds. And we'll see one of my favorite species, the blue throat, which is a colorful songbird that comes over from Asia and spends the winters down in Southeast Asia, and comes up and breeds in a couple local areas in Alaska and the Yukon Territory. And they're like the mockingbirds of the tundra. They'll sing a bunch of different songs mimicking other species. Here, I've heard their song is, I didn't get it. Unfortunately, didn't get this guy singing any of the birds. I heard this individual doing several species, including Lapland longspur and American golden plover, throughout his repertoire throughout the day, and he'll sing all day long because the sun doesn't set where he's going to live. And we can also go from colorful to one of the drivest birds that we have breeding in Alaska, the Arctic warbler, which is pretty much just this little greenish old world warbler that also comes from Asia. And you can see them fairly commonly in all the willow areas in Denali National Park and west of there. This guy's going to come all the way from Asia, and you can hear some other birds that we're familiar with in the background, like white-crowned sparrow. Let's sing one more time. Like white-crowned sparrow and Wilson's warblers are sitting in the background, and there's also northern stripe, which is a predator in this area. And as we keep on traveling further north, we're going to see a species of mammal that's really well known across much of the northern latitudes, the caribou or the reindeer. And these animals can live in herds of up to several thousand across the North Slope as they migrate, searching for food and trying to find warm areas and avoid the harshness of winter. And as we travel all the way up to the northern part of the state where the caribou are, we're going to see a couple new shorebird species like American golden plover, which is going to come all the way from South America. And they're going to nest on the tundra in these open areas. A lot of species will nest in the grass, but this tundra, just like a killdeer back in the lower 48, will nest in the open area. You can see its eggs at the bottom of this picture in the center, right around here if my cursor is working. And they're really hard to see, and they're really well camouflaged because they want to make it so that their chicks will survive and hatch and grow up to become adult plovers, which can come and breed in the future. We'll see birds like Baird's Sandpiper taking use of the tundra, and long-billed dowitcher, and semi-palmated plover. And one of my favorites, the white-rumped sandpiper, which nests in a very small area of Alaska and also more commonly over in Canada. And then they'll take this long migration all the way down to the southern tip of South America. You'll also see ruddy turnstone. We're familiar with them from the beaches in Florida, but up on the tundra, they're the bad boys of the shorebird world. They'll actually come and eat other shorebird eggs if they find their nest, or attack small birds for food, because they're kind of the bullies up here. We'll see the pectoral sandpiper, which has one of the coolest displays of any bird on the tundra. They'll blow up these air sacs and fly over the female and just go and give them this low booming sound. Boom, 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 as they fly over the females. And one female will have several males that are trying to win her over at a time. And another shorebird that does a cool display is the buck-breasted sandpiper, which will form a lek, sometimes of 5 to 10 males, as they display for the females, raising their wings in the air, either a single wing or sometimes a double wing, flashing this white so the females can see them from far away across the tundra. And the females select a male to mate with, and then she'll go off and nest maybe a mile or two away from the lek site. And these leks will actually move around from year to year, so they're almost never in the same area one year after the other. And here's the buck-breasted sandpiper doing the double wing display. And another cool bird we have on the tundra up here is the red phalarope, which exhibits reverse polymorphism, which means that the males and the females are brighter plumage than the males. So you might think that the male's on the left here, but it's actually the female that's on the left and the male's on the right. And the male's going to do all the chick rearing duties until once they arrive, they're going to sit and they're going to spin around in circles trying to get up food, and the female's going to lay the eggs, and then she's going to take off. And here's a similar species, the redneck phalarope, which is also up there. You can see the distinctive circular swimming pattern of phalaropes as they're picking insects off the surface and trying to stir them up from the bottom. And the female, when she lays the egg, she's going to be done with the nesting process. And she's just going to be the male that's sitting on the nest for the rest of the time until the chicks finally hatch. And the male's going to take really good care of him. He should win Dad of the Year because he's just going to take good care of them until they're old enough to fly and take off on their own off to the open ocean. So they're going to wander across the tundra and share it with a bunch of other species like common eider and king eider, which is one of the most beautiful ducks we have up here in Alaska. And stellars, the bizarre looking stellar's eider, which is also endangered. And the really unique spectacled eider, which in addition to the cool plumage has a cool story how they winter off in the middle of the ice where there's open patches of ice in the Bering Sea. And up until the 1970s, researchers didn't know where they lived, but the locals did. And the researchers didn't believe them, and they stuck some GPS trackers on them, or satellite trackers. And because these birds spend the winter in the ice, their bodies are so warm that it broke most of the satellite transmitters they put on them. And one time they got a couple blips out in the middle of the ocean, and they didn't believe it, but they flew out there just in case to see. And they found thousands and thousands of eiders out in the middle of the ocean, in the shallow waters of the Chukchi Sea and the Bering Sea, where open patches between the ice allowed the eiders to live and feed down on the ocean floor, where they feed on clams and mollusks. And here's a spectacled eider raising her young on the tundra before they're going to go off in a couple months to feed in the winter. We'll also see birds like long-tailed duck and brant. And we'll see the rock ptarmigan up here, where it's willow cousin likes a little bit of tree cover, or shrubs at least. The rock ptarmigan can survive in areas that are pretty barren. And here's a female rock ptarmigan. She doesn't blend in as well in the snow as the male did. But by the time that June rolls around, most of the area's starting to thaw up, so she's getting into her summer plumage pretty quickly. And we'll see loons in their wonderful breeding plumage, like red-throated loon and Pacific loon. And one of the high Arctic specialties, a yellow-billed loon, which doesn't make it down to lower 48 that much. Maybe a couple will show up in Washington every year. And these guys like it up in the Arctic. And most of the other loon species will nest on small lakes, but the yellow-billed loon only nests on large lakes. And we can see they're similar to our common loon plumage-wise, but they have this massive yellow bill, which is much larger and just a much bigger bird overall than our common loon that we're much more familiar with probably. This pair was scoping out a nesting area. They have a hard time walking, so they have to nest right on the edge of the lake so they can jump off and get into the water if any predators come by. Also up in the tundra, we're going to see the short-eared owl, as well as one of the stars, the snowy owl, as they fly around bright white on the tundra, defending their nest where their young are. And the snowy owls, like many other owl species, they hatch their eggs asynchronously, which means that one chick will hatch before the others, and there'll be quite the size range, almost like a Russian stacking doll set. And this is so that they can put their priority on the bigger young and make sure that they survive. And if there's enough food around, they'll be able to feed the littler chicks. But if not, they'll just perish because there's not enough food to go around. And the adults constantly are looking for food. They're bringing food back to the nest and they're storing it. If there's a surplus, they can store lemmings and other birds, other like shorebirds around the nest. And they'll just constantly be feeding these to the young or going out and collecting more food. And then throughout the season, the young will keep growing until they're old enough to wander off on their own. And once they're big enough to wander out of the nest, they'll roam around. Even though they can't fly, they'll wander the tundra looking to separate just in case a predator does come by and the adults can't defend them. They'll be in different locations, so a predator can't wipe out a single nest in one go. Some of the other predators up there are long-tailed Jaeger and the Pomeranian Jaeger, which is the big bad Jaeger of the tundra. And they'll come down and swoop on anything that gets close to their nest, especially researchers and foxes and even other birds that get too close. And sometimes they'll go attack photographers when they get too close to the nest, because they're only going to hatch 2 eggs. And once their eggs hatch, their young are going to wander across the tundra, and their parents are going to take care of them, but they're not going to be in the nest because they want to make sure they wander as much as they can so predators can't find them. And one of the biggest predators up there is the glaucous gull. It's the only common gull we have up on the Arctic tundra. And our rarer gull, which is much prettier and a little bit less predatory, is the Sabin's gull. And also one of their relatives is the Arctic tern, as we said, migrates all the way down to Antarctica during the winter and then all the way up to Alaska during the summer. So this bird probably sees more daylight than any other animal on Earth. And out on the coast, we might see some seabirds like the black guillemot, which nests on the rocky shorelines. And if we follow the guillemot out to its preferred feeding area out in the areas where there's still sea ice in the summer, we might see some other cool species like walrus as they're hauled out or moving around with their young. You might see beluga whales, which migrate along the coast. But the main mammal that the people of northern Alaska are interested in is the bowhead whale. And they hunt the bowhead whale so they can have subsistence for the winter, because it's really expensive to ship food up there. So all the grocery stores are very expensive. And, for thousands of years, the people have been hunting bowheads. They say, once they learned to hunt the bowhead, that was similar to agriculture in northern Alaska, because they can't grow any crops up here. During the winter, it's really cold. And getting one whale or 2 whales for the season can feed a whole village for most of the year. And they try to use as much of the whale as they can, and whatever they can't, they'll dump outside of town. The Inupiat people will, to make sure that one of the biggest predators in the area, the polar bear, won't come into town and will come outside of town, so the Inupiat people and the polar bears can live in harmony. And the polar bears will come up and eat the whale carcasses and try to find any scraps they can before heading back out into the sea ice in the summertime once it pulls away in late June. And once they do that, they're going offshore, and they'll be offshore for the summer before coming back in the winter. And if we follow them offshore, we might see some other interesting species like the short-tailed shearwater, which is a seabird that comes all the way from New Zealand to come up and follow the perpetual daylight of the Arctic Ocean in the summertime. We'll see northern fulmars, which spend the winters in Alaska and also breed on some of the rocky islands. And just like the short-tailed shearwater, the mottled petrel comes all the way from New Zealand up to the Bering Sea, where they're quite rare and often very, very highly sought after from birders because they're not easy to see from shore anywhere. We'll see some albatross coming from the Hawaiian Islands and Japan, like the black-footed albatross, the Laysan albatross. And one of the conservation success stories is the short-tailed albatross, which populations numbered in the tens about 70 or 80 years ago, but through a bunch of conservation efforts down in, especially on the islands off the coast of Japan, their numbers have rebounded up to several thousand individuals, and they're starting to nest in the Hawaiian Islands again on Midway Island, where they hadn't nested in probably over 100 years. So it's really, really good to see, and we're seeing them a lot more offshore up here, which is great news. And if we follow the albatross around, we might run into an island eventually. There's a couple islands in the Bering Sea, like St. Paul Island, or St. Lawrence Island, or St. Matthews Island, where a bunch of seabirds nest. They nest by the millions, like species like least auklets. And a lot of things birders go to these islands for to look for birds coming from Asia that aren't seen anywhere else in the United States, like sharp-tailed sandpipers or great-tailed tattlers. If you're really lucky, you might be able to catch a little glimpse of some Asian bird, like this rufous-tailed robin here, which we flushed up back in 2012. Well, one of my favorite reasons to visit these is to see the nesting seabirds, because instead of just seeing one or two of a species very quickly, you can see hundreds of them in a single day and see them throughout the day, like the least auklet and the funny looking parakeet auklet and the cool looking crested auklet, which in addition to the crest has a really cool feature where they smell like tangerines. If you ever get a chance to sniff one, like a museum specimen, they have this citrusy smell to them. And nobody's not quite sure what that's used for. It might be for mating displays, or it might be to keep some pests off or something. And one of everybody's favorite birds in Alaska, we have two species of puffin up here. The horned puffin, which has a white belly and a yellow beak, and then the tufted puffin, which is all black except for its tufts and its face and its bright orange beak. And then one of our common gulls throughout much of the pelagic areas and deep water parts of Alaska is the black-legged kittiwake. And then if you travel throughout the different islands, you might realize that even though there's a bunch of different islands in the same ocean, they're quite different. Like St. Lawrence Island has this big mountains, and it's really, really famous for walrus hunting. That's where a lot of the natives, it's one of their main food sources for the Siberian Yupik people who live in the villages on St. Lawrence Island. They hunt walrus out there. Then if you go to St. Paul Island, it's very different. It's not as rocky. It's more lush, with a ton of wildflowers. And it's a big northern fur seal rookery. Apparently, there used to be millions that would raise their young here, but due to hunting from, especially once Russians came over in the 1700s, their populations have gone way down. They're starting to rebound a little bit. This is what their pups look like in the fall. And St. Paul Island also has an endemic shrew species, which is left over from the last ice age when the island was connected to the mainland. But now, since sea levels rose after the last ice age, it's separated by several hundred miles of ocean now. And unlike St. Lawrence Island, St. Paul has a couple endemic subspecies like rock sandpiper and Pacific wren. And although it's not an endemic subspecies, this is one of the few spots in the world where red-legged kittiwakes nest. They only nest on a couple islands in the Bering Sea region. Unlike the black-legged kittiwake, which migrates further south in the winter, the red-legged kittiwakes will stay up in the Bering Sea and northern and the Gulf of Alaska, and you can see they have these larger eyes than the black-legged kittiwake, which means that they can feed at night a lot easier. And if we follow them off the shore, we'll see more short-tailed shearwaters as they're heading down towards the Aleutian Islands in the southwestern part of the state, which is a really big feeding area for a lot of mammals like humpback whale here, and you also see like fin whale and sperm whales down in that area. And there's a very small number of Pacific right whales. We have right whales in Florida, but there's different species might only number in the tens or hundreds. And they spend their summers up in the Bering Sea before migrating down the coast of California to the Hawaiian Islands. But not much is known about them because there's so few of them that they can't really tell where they go or what's happening with them. There's only a couple villages in the Aleutian Islands. This is a town of Dutch Harbor on Alaska, where we might see some species that might become familiar to us, like Savannah sparrow and bald eagle. This is the place in the country where if you ever see a sign near a post office that says warning, eagles might attack, that's the post office in Dutch Harbor that has an eagle nest on the cliff above the post office. And they've been known to attack people as they're walking into the building. But like most of the things in the Aleutian Islands, everything's based on what's happening offshore. So there's a lot of large fishing economy out there. And if we follow the fishing vessels, we might see a species like a buller shearwater coming from New Zealand, or a black oyster catcher along the coast, which is quite different than our American oyster catcher, but still fairly similar with that bright orange bill. And we might see a species like a slaty-backed gull coming over from Asia, because the Aleutian Islands extend all the way over into the Eastern Hemisphere, almost touching the Kamchatka Peninsula in Russia. This is one of the big wintering areas for emperor geese, which nest in the Yukon Delta, but winter in the hundreds and thousands in the Aleutian Islands and on Kodiak Island. And then eventually we'll spend the whole summer in Alaska, and the sun's going to set. And winter is going to kick back in after about October or so. So all these birds, like the American golden plover, the American golden plover is going to go all the way back to South America. The blue throat's going to go back to Asia. But some birds, like the great gray owl, are still going to stick around and be one of our 20 or 30 species we'll see throughout the winter. But like most of you probably, and most of the tourists, they're going to hop on a plane and head south. But before we say goodbye for the night, hope that everybody got to see some cool birds up close, and maybe even get some good pictures. And hopefully everybody got to see a bunch of cute babies. And because it's Alaska, we had our obligatory bears. And hopefully everybody got to see some cool scenery as well. And hopefully this presentation inspired everybody to maybe consider traveling either in a tent or an RV and getting a bike or a car and roaming around Alaska someday. And that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Can you take a few questions?
Yeah, I got time for questions if I'm good. If you
All
guys
right. So you guys can, participants, you can put questions in the chat, and Susan's going to monitor the chat. If you have any questions, now would be the time. That was a fantastic presentation. I don't know about everyone else, but I'm ready to go.
We'll let you ask to Susan, you're on mute, but
All right. Cindy Monell wants to know, how long have you lived there in Alaska?
I've only lived here for about a year, but I spent 4 summers before that coming up here. So
Very nice. And then Deborah wants to know, what advice can you give on mosquitoes?
typically what I've done is try to go to areas where the mosquitoes aren't. So if you come up in June, they're most of the western part of the state, so the areas of like Nome and Barrow, and the mosquitoes haven't come in yet. So that's mostly what I've done. I've never actually seen, I've only seen a couple little terrible areas of mosquitoes, and for that I just deal with it out of the car. It's nothing, I've never seen anything like worse than I have and down in the Everglades in the summer. But one of the nice thing is once the birds go off to breed, they can be pretty quiet. So when you come up to go look for birds in Alaska, you really want to get here when everything's singing and setting up territories before they've actually started nesting. And if you do that, a lot of times you'll be in these areas where there aren't, where the mosquitoes haven't come out yet. And if you're lucky enough to go up to a spot like St. Paul Island, there actually aren't any mosquitoes out there. So that's a nice perk of going out to some of these offshore islands.
Yeah, it's everywhere. Like, you have a lot of compliments on your pictures and your presentation. Jan Gorski wanted to know, did you see all of the species pretty close to where you live, or in the variety of habitats across Alaska?
No, so a lot of Alaska has a bunch of different habitats. You do have to travel to a lot of these different habitats to see a lot of the birds. So where I'm in Anchorage, we don't get, I saw like maybe 150 species last year, but a lot of the more interesting birds unfortunately have to get off the road system or fly to places or take more dirt roads to get anywhere.
Now, Emily wants to know, do you recommend a touring company for birding?
Yeah, so there's a local tour company up here called Wilderness Birding Adventures. I don't work for them. I was supposed to work for St. Paul Island Tours, which only does tours on St. Paul Island. And that's about the only way you can visit St. Paul is to go through them. It's the only like economical way. But a couple friends work for Wilderness Birding Adventures, and that's the only like local Alaska tour company up here. And they do a lot of great stuff throughout the state. And a lot of the major birding tour companies like Wings or Field Guides also do tours up there. Any tours are great up here.
Very good. And Loretta said, excellent presentation, lots of birds and great scenery that should inspire travel your way. And she said, nice to see you again. And do you remember when you did some field trips down here with Orange Audubon?
I do, yeah. I can't remember where I went. I can't remember if it was like to Tosahatchee or something, or where I did field trips for. It's been a long time.
Yes, it has. You did get a lot of compliments on all your pictures, the program, the presentation, and they were very beautiful. Jan wants to know, is there any COVID issues right now that prevents travel to Alaska?
Yeah, so Alaska does really want tourism up here. Unfortunately, some of the villages. So unlike almost any other state in the country, we do have a lot of areas, and especially a lot of the cool areas of the state are off the road system. So each town or village that's off the road system has its own restrictions, and some of them are being more cautious. We're not sure if there's going to be a tourism season on St. Paul this year because they're one of the few villages that actually has had 0 COVID cases because they've been very, very strict with their restrictions, not letting outsiders in. Some of the other towns, which are more like hubs, like Nome and Uktiavik, which is the native name for what was formerly known as Barrow, have some degree of tourism. But anywhere on the road system, people are, from what I've understood, more than welcome to travel to. So to go to Kenai Fjords National Park, where you can see puffins and Kidlin's mirrorlets, or go to Denali National Park, or the Denali Highway or the town of Homer, those are all fairly open right now. And I mean, Alaska's at a spot where I think 2 days ago we just announced that anybody who wanted a vaccine could get one. So hopefully a good chunk of the locals are going to be vaccinated in a couple months. So I mean, I got my shot the other day. So we're ready to open up. I'm not 100% sure about the villages, but anywhere on the road system, definitely we're hurting for tourism right now.
Actually, that's really nice. That'll be very helpful. Deborah wants to know, if you want to see shorebirds, what is the best place?
So the two best areas for shorebird flocks are the town of Homer and the town of Cordova. Cordova's it's technically on the road system because the ferry goes there. But that's where the largest flocks of western sandpipers are. But unfortunately, you have to take a boat to get over to the Copper River Delta, which is this large river in Alaska. It has some of the best salmon in the world. They come out of the Copper River Delta, and sometimes there's flocks of up to 50 to 100,000 western sandpipers out there. The easier option is the town of Homer, where the Kachemak Bay Shorebird Festival is. And that's typically during the first or second week of May. So about like May 3rd to 10th is when the numbers peak. And then a little bit after that's when the diversity peaks. So the western sandpipers will have to breed, and some of the other birds like bar-tailed godwit or bristle-thigh curlew will come through. And that's what we did last year. Is we spent a lot of time in Homer, and all the pictures I showed of the big flocks were either from Homer or a spot up the peninsula a little bit, which is also on the road system, but maybe an hour drive from Homer. And that's a really spectacular place to see.
Very nice. Jan also wants to know, did you see these birds over the course of several seasons, or is there one specific time to see the most species?
May and June are definitely the most popular times to come up. To see the biggest diversity, you can come in June. Birds like blue-throated Arctic warbler don't get back until early June, and a lot of the areas, especially up in northern Alaska and Utqiagvik and Barrow and Nome, they can still be snowed in pretty good in the first week of June. So typically, if you do a tour up here, you're going to want to maybe be down on the Kenai Peninsula and around Anchorage and Homer in like late May, and then go to some of the villages and in late May or early June. And then in July, there are still birds around, and the problem is a lot of them are raising young. So there's this like lull period where there's stuff around, but it's harder to find. And then once their babies are around, it's really cool. You don't get to see everything singing, or maybe not in as quite a cool plumage, but you can see like the hawk owls that was in July, and a lot of the other things were a little bit later when birds have babies. So it's it's a fairly short summer, but you can't, it's hard to see everything in one shot unless you spend like a couple months up here.
Very nice. Now, do you ever have to use small planes to get to these areas? Jack is wondering.
Most of the areas don't need small planes. When I flew out to St. Paul Island, that was probably the smallest plane to get to any of the major tourism areas. That was about like a 20 to 30 seater. If you want to visit the village of like Gamble, that sometimes that's as small as like a 5 to 10 seater. And then some areas I went to required helicopters and float planes, but most of the areas that tourists go to don't require small planes. The one exception being a lot of the national parks you have to fly into, other than Denali. Denali you have to fly, you can drive into, and Kenai Fjords you have to take a boat into, and other than that you mostly have to fly into the national parks. There's like Kobuk Valley and Gates of the Arctic, and Katmai National Park is one of my favorites. That's the popular grizzly bear viewing spot. You have to take a float plane to get out there.
Very nice. Linda loves your photos and videos and wants to know, how do you get them? Do you digiscope, or what kind of equipment do you use?
So I have when I went to Hawaii a couple years ago, I bought a large lens. So I have a 150 to 600 zoom camera, and a lot of the wildlife in Alaska, if you're patient enough and sit quietly enough, it'll come close to you. And like we saw with the shorebirds in that video, they really don't care about people. They're focused on one thing. They're focused on feeding. So if you get yourself set up in the right area and know the conditions, so the shorebirds are very tidal, and we have huge tides up here in Alaska. Some of the areas around where I live, you can have like a 20 to 30 foot tide swing in a day. So if you position yourself to know where they're going to be on the mud flats when the tide's coming in, the tide will just push everything up to right to where you are, and you won't bother the birds at all. And a lot of them, also on the tundra too, a lot of the pictures I did get was doing research. So we would find the nest and monitor the nest, and I would take advantage and get some pictures. It's not like the best practice for general photography because you don't want to bother the birds. But since we were already there for the research purposes, spent an extra couple minutes getting pictures. But a lot of, especially the songbirds up on the tundra, there's not many perches available. So if you stake out a perch that a bird likes and hide yourself pretty well, they'll come back to that perch eventually, since there might only be 4 or 5 available in their territory that they really want to sing from.
Nice.
We'd like to thank Andy for giving his time tonight for this wonderful program with the outstanding photos and all your knowledge that you've gained. Thank you for sharing with us. For those of you interested, we will be putting the recording on our website, so that'll be available soon, and all of our previous ones. So if you've missed a bird chat, you definitely want to check out those. And we hope to see everyone at our monthly meeting on Thursday on Orange Audubon YouTube Live, and our next bird chat about McGee Marsh the last Thursday of the month. So we thank everyone for joining us, and we hope you have a wonderful evening, and stay safe, and everyone take care. Thank you for coming.